Sunday morning on BBC Radio Scotland.
It's 8:05. It's Sunday morning with me, Connie McLaughlin. How are you doing? I hope you've had a nice morning so far, whatever you're up to. Coming up with me for the next 2 hours, we're going to be discussing that awkward conversation or difficult conversation it can be at times, talking to our kids about faith. We're going to look at a classic work of young adult fiction and how it's been adapted for the screen, with that in mind. There's loads going on in the world right now to feel a little bit frustrated about, lots to be happy about, but also some things that maybe might be quite difficult for us. So with that in mind, we're asking, is the protest song still something that is used to express our passions about injustice? And friendships, life-enhancing when they work. They're great things, aren't they? But what happens when they start to go wrong? We'll look at that as well. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to be having a look back at the key points in this year's General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, including the Kirk's historic connections with slavery. That plus lots more. But in this programme, you know what it's like. We've always got some good music. Let's kick things off with Stevie Wonder and I Wish. Get you moving on a Sunday morning, isn't it? I Wish by Stevie Wonder. By the way, speaking about getting moving, when I was coming into the office this morning, I was seeing loads of people getting ready, limbering up for the Edinburgh Marathon. Is that you this morning? If it is, bravo, kudos to you. I'm not sure how far I would get if I even started to attempt it. So good luck if you're taking part this morning. I think it's 10 o'clock it all starts in the capital today. Last week, actually, you may remember we were speaking to the lovely lady who's in charge, the new moderator of the Church of Scotland, and we were discussing the Assembly Hall and everything that was happening there in the Mounds. It was the annual General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. It was a chance for ministers, elders and deacons to come together and discuss many of the pressing issues facing the church. We thought we would give you a little bit of a highlight of everything that was said. Have a listen to this.
Now it is my privilege to submit for your approval the nomination of the Reverend Sally Foster Fulton as moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland.
Look at you, wonderful people. I am beyond humbled, inexpressibly honored, and more than just a wee bit excited to be your moderator.
Firstly, I acknowledge that this is a very sensitive and difficult topic. Assisted dying often provokes a visceral and emotional reaction. I am simply seeking that the Assembly acknowledge a diversity of views within our church.
Moderator, may I invite you to ask the Chief Rabbi to address the Assembly now.
We thank Almighty God for bringing us to this precious moment of friendship, of a healthy relationship.
We are in crisis. Ministerial morale is low. I have lost count of the number of conversations I've had with friends and colleagues about being on antidepressants, about having lost all enthusiasm, and people saying, if they offered redundancy, I'd be first in the queue.
I'd said this morning that sometimes music goes to places that words can't, and there are a lot of words happening here, so we're going to sing. We're going to sing.
Listen to the silence, listen to the noise.
Black ministers like myself go through a lot. You walk into people knowing fully well that you are there, but you're not there. All you can do is acknowledge what I'm going through.
We cannot be tolerant of intolerance, because that is to be tolerant of denying people's humanity.
We live in a racist society. Racism is an ongoing, daily, pernicious legacy of slavery. Through this report, we know our church just that little bit better. And knowing ourselves better, I think our prayer is, may we become better people.
Some highlights for you there. Last week, of course, lots of members of the Church of Scotland descending on the Assembly Halls there for the annual General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. Now, the Church has many pressing issues to deal with. We heard a lot of them there, particularly just trying to ensure its life in Scotland and its part of society continues, and just how to do that. What's the roadmap forward? I'm joined by three ministers who attended this week. The Reverend Brian Kerr, Minister of Greyfriars Parish Church in Lanark. Morning, Brian.
Morning.
And the Reverend Dr Robert Smith, Minister of Rubislaw Parish Church. Morning, Robert.
Good morning.
We've got the Reverend Tara Granados, Minister of Ibrox Parish Church. Morning, Tara.
Good morning.
Listen, lots to get through. There's so many parts, even in just that small little clip that we heard there of really big issues that were discussed, that were brought to the surface, that had light shone on them. I thought probably the best place to start was just at the end of that clip there. And we discussed it last week actually with the Reverend Sally Foster Fulton about her role as the moderator, but also what she wants to do in the road going forward with this connection to the Church of Scotland. And slavery was one of the big talking points. Brian, what was the outcome? What did you hear this week on that topic?
I think all of us would agree that what we heard were some incredibly powerful moments in the General Assembly, and particularly in thinking about the historic links that the Church of Scotland has to slavery, and in other places as well, thinking about the way that we treat people, not only in historic but also present reality within Scotland, and how we need to play our part in making sure that Scotland is more tolerant, is more able to understand where it has come from, what its story is, and also take our part in the shame of that story at times. And the Church of Scotland is no different to any other organisation within our nation.
Robert, I guess that sometimes is the difficult thing, isn't it? Looking back and then trying to navigate and find the way forward. For you as an American, what do you see, looking into this situation and I guess where we're at right now?
Yes, well, it certainly is an incredibly difficult issue. As a person of color, by the way, I am all too aware of the impact of racism on our society today, and the way that it feels at times that people seem to have taken freer charge, or certainly feel freer to express these kinds of racist sentiments. It's very important, I believe, to educate all of us about how slavery has impacted our society and how racism grew out of that. There is a connection to a lot of our historical buildings. And we need to really be aware of how our churches might be connected with some of those legacies. Some people may not realize, but there were theological arguments that were used to justify treating people as chattel, slaves. And so we need to be self-critical as we look at our feelings, our understandings, and how they are shaped, and how we need to look at them to make sure that they do not add to racism, but indeed fight racism in our society today, in our congregations.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, Tara, isn't it? Because this is such a wider issue within society. What role do you think the church has to play in trying to chip away at changing this narrative that we have and we see?
I think the church models good work on this. I think, institutional apology, institutional, acknowledgement requires this kind of internal reflective work. And that's what we've done in this first instance. We've investigated, we've created this report to inform the local, and now it's in the hands of each parish minister to kind of guide their own congregation to do that reflective work. And I don't think this work is done. I think this is the beginning, of a longer journey.
Robert, is institutional apologies enough? What would be enough to in some way, make reparation for what's happened?
Well, that's a tough one because
I guess it's different for everyone as well in terms of what they would want to see.
It would be. And I guess the key question is how would an apology be made meaningful to the people that we serve in our congregations and the wider community? How would that really impact in a positive way that would allow for healing, that would allow for transformation going forward? And I think that is the key. So it's an incredibly complex issue, one that we need to continue to wrestle with. As Tara was saying, this is not something that's over. It's something that will always, should always be on our radar as we seek to find ways to bring about real change in this whole issue. So apology, yes, but how do we make it meaningful?
Brian?
Yeah, and I think part of the way that we make it meaningful is to live it now. One of the other parts of the reports that we heard was about the fact that ministers and others within the Church of Scotland still suffer the most abhorrent forms of racism within our society. And as a church, we've called that out. And as a church, we need to keep calling it out. So along with the historical acknowledgement, along with apology, we need to begin to live what we learn from that awful period of our world's history and our part in that, and actually think about how it changes our church and our nation for the better.
Brian, in that actually, I guess this is part of, if you look at any organisation, you look at culture, don't you? And you think about what are we doing first and foremost before we start to try and help other people and shape how they think and feel. And I suppose just listening to what some people were saying in the assembly about how they feel within themselves, their mental health, their well-being, I suppose there's a difficult jump to be made. Is it a case of like put your own oxygen mask on first before you start to help other people? How do you try and in some way make that better?
Oh, if only the church had oxygen masks for ministers at the moment. There is, and I think the laughter of all three of us around this
Exactly,
table
that's what I was
maybe
gonna say,
symbolises where we are.
Talk to me about that.
Listen,
Tell me what it's like.
I'm also a deputy presbytery clerk looking after a huge area of Scotland now, 120 churches and ministers and all the folks within it. Now, do I think the Church of Scotland is doing enough to care for its ministers? Absolutely not. Do I wish they did more? Yes, because I think that in all this institutional change that we're going through, the people who are carrying a lot of that on their shoulders, the people who are working through some of these discussions with congregations, with communities, looking at building closures, all these things are the ministers and deacons of our church. And sadly, there has been not enough done to, as we heard in the package before our conversation, not enough done to ensure that ministers are actually cared for. And we keep hearing it's our job. It's our job to be kinder to each other. It's our job to take a day off. Well, yeah, those will go so far, but it's also got to be other folks' jobs to help and to aid and to guide so that we can actually have time to focus on who we are, time to focus on our congregations and time to actually deal with some of these stresses that are currently going on with this restructuring of the church.
Tara, is that a feeling that is widespread in the church from what you know and from what you see?
It is. Coaching change well, coaching people through a season of change is really difficult. And as ministers, when we make our own schedules, largely, it's really easy to overwork and overschedule yourself. And a lot of the work we do is unseen. I think a lot of change management is actually invisible emotional work that you do with people. And so it can feel like you don't have a lot to show for it. You haven't produced this many, papers or this many, it's really invisible kind of relational work. But when you do that well, you really can embrace change in a positive way. But as ministers, you can't do that in real time with your congregation. You kind of have to process your own grief and your own anxiety and your own whatever ahead of time so that when you come to your congregation, you can be that kind of neutral, peaceful presence to kind of hold their anxiety and their grief and help coach them through that. So you have to take that time alone so that you can really be present for your congregation.
It's such an interesting point, isn't it, Robert? Because I think a lot of people just expect people who are in positions of power, I guess, in this situation, people who are there to look after them. It's the same as how we look at, I suppose, in the medical profession. We don't expect doctors to ever be sick. We don't expect nurses to ever have anything wrong with them. It's the same thing. People who are there in a pastoral role to care for us, we don't really think of them as people. And for you, what must that look like? What change must happen to make that easier and for you to be in a better place, Robert, to actually care for your congregation?
Well, it's interesting. I think for the last year or so, a key word for me has been that of rest. And what does it really look like? There's an co-author writing who says that rest is an act of defiance. It's to stand up in the face of the demands of the world and declare, I will not be owned. We certainly need to be better at that in the church. I personally had a mental health issue about a year and a half ago, and I just hit the wall. I was in a very dark place. And I was very grateful for the support that the Church of Scotland did provide. However, that was after the fact. And so what's been really speaking to me is how can we be proactive so that we can help and support ministers, and by the way, not just ministers, but session clerks and OLNs and deacons and elders, before they get to those dark places. What do we do? And I think part of that answer comes in the restructuring that we're doing. We have lots of unions coming together. We have team ministries. Can we build in consistently and deliberately spaces for ministers and others in the kind of work that we do to have time to rest, to relax, to take a breath, to have a Sunday off here and there, to recharge the batteries and hopefully help create those spaces which nurture us and care for us so we don't get to those dark places. But these are conversations I think we must have, and we fail to do it, rather, to our detriment. It sounds counterintuitive because there's so much work to do, but I think we absolutely have to do that work. Rest.
Part of this as well, Tara, is because not only, as you mentioned earlier, you're holding other people's grief, anxiety, all the things that people need assistance with and help with, but it can be heavy stuff at times. And I'm thinking about you were speaking a lot at the Assembly about assisted dying and all these really heavy conversations, important but heavy conversations. Talk to us a little bit about your message in that part of it and what you had to say, in particular on things like assisted dying.
Sure. This is a topic that's born of my personal experience. As a teenager, I watched my mother die of cancer complications in hospice, and now as an adult, I am watching my father deteriorate slowly from advanced Parkinson's dementia. And neither one of them were afforded, to really articulate what their definition of quality of life is. What is a good death for them? And I think, for me, the church has been putting out these statements that are very absolute, that are it represents an opinion in the church, but only one opinion in the church. And I think my counter motion that I brought was meant to acknowledge that we're not a monolith on this, and that there is a range of opinion, and everyone has been in a hospital room with someone they love, and to watch them suffer, to watch them medicine prolong their suffering. And palliative care is fabulous, and we need stronger palliative care. But I think alongside of that, we should afford people their own choice to have dignity in dying, and we don't talk about death well as a culture and really as a church, even though someone said we deal in resurrection, but we're not so good with the death part. But to die is not to fail at life, and dying doesn't diminish the sanctity of life. And I think that the church should represent. We call ourselves a broad church. We should represent the broad range of views that are there, and make space for that discussion and that dialogue.
How does the church do that, Brian, when there's such difficult ethical questions within this topic in itself? The whole question about how we don't have the right to play God, but then how do you sort of almost in some way balance that with the suffering of another human being?
Well, we've done it before and we'll do it again. This is not the only difficult theological conversation we've had in the church, and we've spent the past 15, 20 years ripping ourselves apart over issues of sexuality, and that's still not resolved fully. So we do have these conversations, and I think one of the things that I take away from the General Assembly was the ability that even in these difficult conversations that we had, and the mood in the Assembly Hall when Tara spoke and raised this issue of a spectrum of views on assisted dying. There were people who deeply disagreed with Tara's position, but there was not one word that was said in anything but love for each other. And I think that's where we begin. And that's where we need to end, that we hold each other through these conversations, that we go into a period where we're able to think theologically, discern where we might find the voice of God within these discussions, and then come out at the other side. And we might never resolve this question, but we might actually begin to understand that a variety of views in lots of different topics is an okay place for a broad church to sit.
Just, I want to get your thoughts before we have to wrap this up on, I guess, the way forward. In a sentence, if you will. I'm going to come to all of you, but Robert, let me start with you about what you want this next year to look like for the church.
Oh, wow.
I know it's not an easy thing to ask in a sentence, is it?
Thanks for that. No, I think the way forward is one of anticipation and hope. We have a a fantastic opportunity, even in the midst of almost what seems like carnage and wreckage with buildings being closed. And by the way, when I leave this interview, I'll be conducting the final worship service in our church building, which will be closing. So I understand, the pain and hurt from it, but there's also a fantastic opportunity not to do things the same way in different places, but to do something completely and radically new. I mean, absolutely new. We've got to. Ways to draw in young families, to look beyond the 10:30, 11 a.m. Sunday morning slot for worship, to other ways, times, places, means of worship, to draw together with meaningful relationships, new relationships throughout the community, with other denominations, et cetera, to make that happen. So I'm excited about it, cautiously, yes.
That was some sentence.
Sorry.
He doesn't pause. That's the problem, Connie. He doesn't pause, Robert.
Listen, you had me. That was great. Right, Tara, briefly if you can.
I certainly would echo, having an attitude of hope. I think facilitating honest conversations about our real feelings, that this is painful. Pruning is not easy. It is cutting away beloved bits that have produced life in the past. But pruning can bring new life. And I think it will shape us into being healthier and better equipped for the future. So it's I think, an honest acknowledgement of this season of pruning and hope that growth will come from it.
Okay, Brian, in a word, what's your hopes?
Oh, never done that before. Laying down the things that might be precious to us but are not actually working anymore. People enjoy what we're doing, absolutely, but the church is more than enjoyment for the few. It's about reaching out and sharing the good news of God with the many, and we need to find new ways of doing that. And I, for one, am quite excited about the possibilities for that in the next year or so.
Listen, thank you so much to all of you for taking your time this morning to chat to us. That was Reverend Brian Kerr, Reverend Robert Smith and the Reverend Tara Granados. Really interesting chat. Right, coming up after me at 10 o'clock this morning, it's the Sunday show. Martin Geisler and Fiona Stocker, as always, on BBC One and on BBC Radio Scotland. What's coming up on the programme this morning, Fiona?
Good morning to you. Yes, an eclectic mix, as always, as you would think. The outgoing head of Police Scotland, Sir Ian Livingston, admitted the force is racist, sexist and misogynist. That was a story that was covered a lot during the week, Connie. Now, Martin's going to be speaking to the man charged with fixing the problem, who's Assistant Chief Constable David Duncan. Also a lot about the Scottish Deposit Return Scheme. It's been back in the headlines as the UK government green-lighted a partial version, but we'll be asking, will it ever go ahead? Full review of the Sunday papers. Shona Craven from The National will be with us, and Adam Morris, who's former head of communications with the Scottish Conservative Party. And after 11, the Scottish Government's announced a summit to tackle violence in Scotland's schools. We'll be asking how bad is the problem and why perhaps some children are resorting to lashing out. I'll be speaking to a trauma expert who's talking about why bad behaviour is, in fact, often a symptom of much deeper emotional and cognitive distress. Also, whether or not you live in Glasgow, you might be aware of the Boyd Ord building on University Avenue. It's been a home to Glasgow uni students for some time. It's not the prettiest building, but who's the man it was named after? And I didn't know this. I was at Glasgow Uni and sat in that building. I didn't know he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize. Just shows you how much attention I paid.
You were too busy.
Far too busy studying. Also, of course, you'll be interested in this. All roads lead to Hampden today for the Women's Cup final between Celtic and Rangers. So we're going to have national team captain Rachel Corsie with us to have a chat and a look ahead to the clash, and also just talk about how the profile of women's football is just incredible now and is rising all the time. She's an absolute star, obviously from the North East Riviera, like I am. So Rachel will be on hand.
By the way, it doesn't do any favours whenever you had an end of the season like we had last weekend or weekend and a half ago. It was pretty special.
Absolutely, I know. So all that's coming up at 10 o'clock, Connie.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much for that. Martin Geisler and Fiona Stocker will be with you on your radio, on your telly as well. Now, before that, though, we've got, in a couple of minutes' time, we're going to be hearing from Jalomo, Scottish artist, on his Sacred Space. Before that, though, you might have, if you've been kicking about Edinburgh the last couple of days, there's been some big hitters. We've had Beyonce, we've had Harry Styles, I was actually listening to Harry Styles from my back garden last night, which was something special. You know, that way, just sort of straining to hear which song it was. That's what I do in my spare time now. I've got a 4-month-old. But coming up actually in the
Dance all night till you get it right. Head and dance. Hold them high till you touch the sky. Head and dance. Get yourself ready. For this dance, we're gonna show you how to do. It may take you just a minute. It don't cost you nothing. Just let the groove move you. Dance all night till you get it. Dance all night. Get it, dance. Everybody dance. Hold them high till you touch the sky. Music and dance. People all over doing all kinds of ways, and I want you to feel my body, lover. Please don't take your hands away. Dance all night. What you till you get it right. Head and dance. Hold them high. What you till you touch the sky. Head and dance. Dance all night till you get it right. Head and dance. Feel it in your bones. Hold them high. Feel it in my bones. Till you touch the sky. Dance all night long. Dance all night long. Whoa. Dance all night till you get it right. Everybody dance. Head and dance. Hold them high till you touch the sky. Such a head and dance. Oh, there's a good feeling when you get it right. Head and dance. you get it right. Hand and dance. Hold them high till you touch the sky. Hand and dance. Dance all night till you get it right. Hand and dance.
In the dark. Now, we've got an occasional series on the programme called Sacred Spaces. I don't know if you've maybe heard it before, but this week Scottish painter John Lowry Morrison, also known as Jalomo, has been telling us about a special place in which he works, a place to him that is both spiritual and sacred.
I'm a lay preacher, and I've preached all over Argyll, and in fact I've preached up as far as Inverness and Crathy. The Queen was there, that was just wonderful, and then the following year the King was there. I've been up there several times, and I just love preaching. The actual preparation, you get into God, if you like, or God gets into you. You can see it that way possibly. About 20 years ago, I was in a wee church here at Bellanoch, which is near Tavy, and I heard God's voice before the service. I always like to get to the service before the band. I'd been there sort of thinking, there's something going on here. It's a kind of supernatural sort of feeling. The first time I felt that, I felt it in Switzerland. I was walking back from a Bible study, 2 o'clock in the morning, about 9,000 feet up in the Alps. I felt this funny feeling, and I sat beside the village well, water trickling away, and all of a sudden I just felt this feeling that Christ was standing next to me, and then he came into me. I could feel it. I could feel his body, if you like, coming into me. So that was the first time I felt that. And then the second time was about maybe 20 years ago. I was in Bellanoch Church and I had the same feeling again. And God said to me, do 2 Ps. And that was it, 2 Ps. And I'm going, what the heck is 2 Ps? During the service, it came to me and it went, painting and preaching. And I could hear it again. And I don't know whether people thought I was going off my head because I nearly said it. So the studio here is in Tavy. We've been here best part of 50 years. It's just the most wonderful place in the world. The house overlooks the Sound of Jura. We've got a boat and we can go anywhere from here down to Gia or up towards the Corryvreckan. The bay of Tavy itself, I don't know, there's something about it. All the boats bobbing about, and I know you can see that anywhere in the world, but there's something about Tavy that is quite unreal to me. It's more a spiritual thing. I think that applies to nearly everything in this area in Argyll, and I think that's why all the people that came from Ireland to Christianise the West Coast, Columba, for instance, was here in the 5th century to bring Christianity to Scotland. On any given Sunday, I'll be preaching. So on the rare occasion I have time for myself, I'm in the studio. Well, here we are in the corridor of the studio, and it's got lots of light because it's all glass. And coming into the studio itself, it's the same thing. It's glass gable ends and lots of light in the roof. And we have quite a high space. It's 1.5 storey, and the windows are actually modelled on Charles Rennie Mackintosh's windows, all the windows that he did and all the buildings that he did. It's just a lovely, lovely light, even just now as the rain pours down on top of the building and looking out, the sky is so dark, but it's not. It's really, really light. It's just a lovely space. There's something about it. I think that is because all the time I'm praying. When I get up in the morning, I come in here, I get the coffee going, and then I sit down and pray for a good day's painting. During that time of painting, I'm still praying. It's quite an amazing thing. And that's why I think the paintings are so valuable to people. I've not really understood why. I use high key colour. That started in Switzerland. The actual air was just absolutely beautifully clear. It was just the colour was just incredible. And that's the first time I actually knew what high key colour was. And that's the way I paint now. I don't know how spirituality works. I find that when I'm painting, sometimes it's quite hard and sometimes it's really simple. It's like painting with numbers. The painting just suddenly appears. And I think that is the supernatural thing, if you like. It's God laying his hand on you. Christ's Spirit is laying his hand on you. And I just love that. All I know is that God's here. So this place that we're in, even though it's just an ordinary studio, is very sacred to me. I just love everything about it, and hopefully it will stay that way.
Oh, that was artist John Lowry Morrison on painting and on his relationship with God. Now, I'm with you until 10 this morning. We're going to be talking about protest songs and if they pack the same punch that they used to. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to be delving into one of the central themes of a classic book by children's writer Judy Blume, the relationship between children and faith. How do we answer those questions? Some more music this morning for you now. This is Madonna.
Things haven't been the same since you came into my life. You found a way to touch my soul, and I'm never, ever, ever gonna let it go. Happiness lies in your own hand. It took me much too long to understand how it could be until you shared your secret with me. Something's coming over. Something's coming over.
Madonna. It's just coming up to 10 to 9 here in BBC Radio Scotland. It's Connie McLaughlin with you on Sunday morning until 10 o'clock. Now, a classic young adult book by American author Judy Blume called Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, has recently made its way onto the big screen. This beloved tale delves into the trials of girlhood, puberty and the quest for religious identity. And like its main character, Margaret, many young people still find themselves grappling with questions about religion and just where it fits into their lives as they also try to establish, I suppose, their own identity as well. It got us thinking about this as a bigger question. With me to discuss this more is Reverend Hayley Cohen, North Esk Parish Church in Musselburgh. That's where she's from. Morning, Hayley. Oh, we'll make sure Hayley's line's there in just a second. We've also got Reverend Ruth Kennedy, who is a pioneer minister with Under 40s in Dunblane. Morning, Ruth.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Connie.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Hayley, are you with us?
I'm with you, Connie.
Oh, excellent. Good stuff. Okay. This is a difficult one, isn't it? This is never an easy... As with most questions in parenthood, I'm now finding it's not an easy thing to navigate. Hayley, how do you start by in some way supporting children through these difficult questions? And I suppose that big one about their identity and I suppose how religion falls into that.
Well, for me, I have to go back to my childhood and growing up because I grew up like Margaret in an interfaith family and was really encouraged by my parents to explore and ask questions. So I think that's crucial, just being very open-minded to young people's questions and not dismissing difficult ones and really allowing them to have a space to explore.
There's a real similarity or synergy there between what Margaret experienced, as you mentioned, about your own, I guess, that moment of figuring out what path was right for you. How did you do that?
So, yeah, like I said, I grew up in an interfaith family, just like Margaret, in New Jersey. And my dad was Jewish, very secular, didn't really go to synagogue. But my mom was Christian and very religious and went to church. And so growing up, they wanted me and my brother to choose our own path, like Margaret's parents. But I think the difference for us was that we were exposed and encouraged to learn about both religions so that we could make a choice for ourselves. And so I went to church every Sunday with my mom. And even though my dad was secular, we celebrated the Jewish high holidays in our home, which mostly centered around food and friends and a little bit of prayer, but not much. And over time, we actually, it's a bit of a funny story. We went to a neighbor's bat mitzvah and the kind of coming of age ceremony for Jewish children. And we came home and my parents asked my brother, because he was a little bit older than me and getting ready for that sort of pivotal, you're becoming a man, you might have to have a bar mitzvah soon. They asked him, well, what did you think about that? Do you want to be Jewish or Christian? And my brother was like, I don't want to learn another language. I want to be Christian. And the story goes that I ended up getting asked the same question and crying because I didn't want to disappoint my dad and tell him that I wanted to be a Christian too. So the path kind of unfolded naturally for us because we went to church so often, and it was a place that I found belonging.
It's interesting, isn't it, Ruth? Because, listening to Hayley's story there about this idea of we're trying to do our best as parents to give some sort of level of autonomy to our children and choice and giving, this idea of a little taster into all, what, Hayley explaining there that she was given an insight into both religions, but there can be a heaviness of choice for a young person there, Ruth, to make such a large life-changing decision at such a young age.
Yeah, and I was just reflecting on what you had said as well about as we grow into parenthood,
you kind of think, I don't know about you, but I go, wow, such newfound respect for my own parents.
100%.
As I step into where they were. Yeah, I had a little bit of a different experience myself to Hayley in that I grew up in a Christian home, and as far as we know, I'm actually the 5th generation of Church of Scotland ministers on my father's side down the Dunnet line. So because of that, I think I probably stuck my heels in a little bit to say nope.
Yeah.
But what resonated with Hayley's story there was just about that openness to explore in a constructive and positive environment. And certainly that's been the approach that I've taken with our own teenagers. But also when you think about things in a wider sense, surely this is a good approach to parenting in terms of faith, spirituality, religion, and other areas. We love sport. I love sport, always have done. I've competed in it from, I don't know, probably from when I was crawling around the floor trying to beat my dad in a crawl race or something. And it's important to us that just as much as faith is part and parcel of our family conversations, so sport and an active family lifestyle. And so our approach to sport with our kids has been very much, this is part of lifestyle. How do you want it to be? What do you like? Let's listen to you and respond to what you're saying and encourage you in a positive environment into that. And I quite like that approach in thinking about faith as well, in the sense that explore it, have a think about it, and creating that space for children and young people to consider and contemplate life and what we see and what we don't see, but in a really supportive way.
Because Hayley, within that, and you'll have experienced this in your own childhood growing up, and you were mentioning that even with the sort of the rituals of whether it be with food or with friends and everything else, it's difficult, isn't it? Because young people, there's some sort of connection to this as part of your life, and shedding that and sort of trying not to have that connected to the spiritual or the religious element of it can be tricky, because then you don't want to lose part of yourself by saying, I don't want to be part of this religion.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I will never not be Jewish. Regardless of how there's 1,000,001 different ways to be Jewish in the world. And I have found my own way of honoring that part of myself, even as I am a Christian minister, because it's important to me. It's part of my culture. It's part of my heritage. And I've got a 11-month-old son now, and thinking about kind of, what do I want him to know about our family? What do I want him to learn about faith? I want him to explore Judaism. I want him to know that side of our family history. I'm looking at my desk is very messy from being on maternity leave. There's Hanukkah candles sitting on my desk for next year, all ready to go.
And that's the thing, isn't it? You want to give choice. You want to, help people understand, what's out there and help support them in that decision making, I suppose, Ruth. But it's so interesting to hear children. There's something innate within us all that at some stage we start to ask these bigger questions. What does that tell us about how we are as humans, Ruth?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, when we think back to even toddlers going on a walk through the forest, there is this inbuilt curiosity to stop at every stick or every stone or every muddy puddle and explore it and just investigate it. And it's gorgeous. I love that about life, that there is this interest in what is going on in and around us. And that definitely, you can see that all the way through all the ages and stages of life. It just might express itself in different ways. And then I think there's also a part in and around probably the teenage years, although I have to say I am not a child development expert, but I can talk as from experience, in and around teenage years where identity is so crucial. We read it in the book. If you read the Judy Blume book, you can see she's searching for identity. And even in my own ministry now, when I'm listening to teenagers, a lot of their questions are around, identity linked with acceptance. You know, will I be accepted? If there is a God, can he possibly accept me for who I am?
And these are these are huge parts of this, I suppose, as well, this idea of identity and who we are. Listen, thank you so much, both of you, this morning. It's been so interesting to talk to you. That was the Reverend Hayley Cohen and the Reverend Ruth Kennedy, chatting about, I guess, those bigger questions and how difficult it is sometimes to answer them. Right, calling off after 9, the tricky territory of losing friendship. But before we get to the news, some more music for you. This is...
Thinking I've been better off without you by my side. But baby, this season
Radio,
FM,
your smart speaker,
and on BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio Scotland.
Past 9. It's Sunday morning with me, Connie McLaughlin. How you doing? We've got lots to talk about between now and 10 o'clock, including how do you know when a friendship is no longer good for you? And just how easy is it to walk away? That's coming up in a couple of minutes' time. As well as the story behind the scandal that hit the American church with hundreds of thousands of followers, including high-profile devotees like musician Justin Bieber. You might have seen this story already. First, though, you were hearing in the news, it's Radio 1's big weekend this weekend. It's been in Dundee, actually, since Friday. Arlo Parks is performing today, and we thought...
1, 2, 3. Good love. Good love. Good love. Good love. I was feeling so bad. I asked my family doctor just what I had. I said, Doctor, Doctor, Mr. MD, Doctor, now can you tell me what's ailing me, Doctor? He said, yeah, yeah, yeah.
What happens when friendships go wrong? What happens when they end? You'll no doubt have seen in the news this week that TV pair Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield have ended their on-screen partnership. But how do you cope if it happens in real life? There's endless songs and films about the breakups of romantic relationships, but hardly any time at all is given to the breakup of our platonic relationships, especially ones with our friends, even though they can often be equally as heartbreaking. Here to chat to me more about this is Susie Beaumont, who's a personal development consultant and founder of Change Your World. Morning, Susie.
Good morning, Connie. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good to have you along this morning. We've also got Anna Shields, who's a singer and guitarist in the Glaswegian band Dead Pony. Morning, Anna.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. Do you know, listening to, I don't know, just this sort of idea of the end of something that can be a really huge and important part of our life is difficult, Susie. We don't really talk about breaking up with pals, do we?
No, we don't. And I mean, I've had this experience myself where I have had two significant friendships that have ended for various reasons, and they really cut deep. And I think there's something about what you said there about, you know, we talk about romantic relationships that, you know, breaking down. There's all the movies about it, but not friendships. And there's a kind of expectation that friendships will always be there. You know, I think about Trainspotting and that quote they said about Begbie, oh, you know, he's a mate, what can you do? And you just, you know, kind of accept that your friends will be there through thick and thin, even though the behaviour might not be great or the friendship's not great. But it's this, when they do break down, it tends, for me, my experience was it really cut deeper than a romantic relationship breaking down, because it just, you know, the expectation was it would always be there and we'd always just kind of muddle on through and be in each other's lives.
It's a strange thing, isn't it, Anna? I suppose how we process that and how we actually get to a point where we begin to heal if we've had this experience. You wrote a song about it.
Yeah, I did. I had a really awful friendship breakup a few years ago, and I've had multiple actually. But I wrote a song called 23 Never Me, which was a kind of song about, like, you know, the actions of this friend, but also how I, in my friendship circle, processed the breakup of that relationship and how we processed moving on.
It's funny because don't you think that there's something, Susie, around you were talking about your experiences, or both of you have obviously had this experience. I think many of us will have had it to a sort of lesser or deeper extent, but I think there's something about you don't really want to talk about it because it's something that you maybe think is a little bit like that happens at school. It's a little bit immature. Like, should we be doing this as adults? Should we be breaking up with our pals as adults?
Yeah, no, it very much does trigger those old kind of school ground wounds. Yeah. And it kind of, you know, nobody sort of prepares you. I mean, the biggest challenge for me when I broke up with friends is that we had mutual friendship groups and we had places that we used to go. So there was a whole kind of, oh, will they still like me? You know, will they still speak to me? Will they judge me? Will they think it's my fault? Or, you know, and I mean, with friendships, there's always, it's a two-way, any relationship is a two-way, you know, issue. You know, there's not just one person, you're in relationship with somebody. And, you know, so there is all those kind of immature and challenging thoughts that come up when you do end a friendship, because you know, it is all the school ground stuff that comes up again, and it kind of feels like you should just get on with it and you should be able to get over it. But I have to say, you know, I find, you know, I can have awkward conversations with my partner, with my family members, but when it came to my friendships, I just felt so ill-equipped to have those kind of awkward conversations or confrontation. I just avoided it like the plague. And then, you know, as a result, it built up and built up and built up until it's irreparable. So, you know, we're not taught this emotional kind of development to have those difficult conversations with people that actually can just walk out of our lives at any point.
Why do you think that is? Is there something around the safety of, you can kind of say what you want to your family, you can kind of say what you want in your relationship with your partner, because, you know, I suppose there's different types of boundaries there. But when it comes to friendships, I don't know, you're there. It's a different type of relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it does seem to be a different relationship. And certainly in my experience, I did feel that, you know, there was that really awkward thinking, if I said this, I mean, there was a fear for me, if I say this, I'm going to lose my friendship. So, you know, I didn't have the same fear with my family or my partner because I'm like, well, they'll be there. You know, there's that expectation. But there is, with a friendship, they can walk away. So there is that fear. And then you're almost like, you don't want to ruin the good times, the fun times. And you're like, oh, you know, and you kind of like, oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And then to the point where, you know, it actually does start getting really bad. Or, you know, there's all various reasons why a relationship can break down. And that comes down to, you know, your values, your priorities, the convenience of being able to meet up. And when you see each other, you know, if your dynamics change. And, you know, sometimes that none of that is said and we don't have the courage to kind of express it and have those conversations because we just feel awkward about it.
There's something in that as well, Anna, about this idea of having the strength to walk away from people who are not good for us as well, particularly if maybe we've had relationships from when we were younger and then maybe our paths take sort of different directions and we realise actually these people are not so good for us anymore. That can be hard, Anna, as well, can't it?
It can be hard. And I think that one thing that is really difficult in friendships is taking accountability for your friends and realising that, you know, in my situation, I was a bit like, I don't agree with the things that this person's saying. I don't agree with the way that this person's making me feel. And it is easier just to ignore that. So it is quite difficult to actually stand up and take accountability for your friendship and for you know, their actions and as well as your actions and really put that into perspective and try and, you know, sometimes you can try and have a conversation about it, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is that sort of thing of like, well, if I speak about this, then they're not going to be my friend anymore. And sometimes that's for the best. I have this total, you know, philosophy that people aren't supposed to be in your life for your entire life. There's this misconception, I feel, with like social media that people are supposed to be in your life forever. But I feel like there are people that should just come and go from your life and that's it, and you don't really have to think on it.
Like almost like a cycle.
Yeah, totally.
Like the cycle of life with people who come in and out and sort of ebb and flow. It's hard, isn't it, as well, Anna, whenever when you're changing. So whenever you're developing and you're growing, there's certain people who might grow alongside you and your values, as Susie was saying there about this idea of your sort of values and I suppose things that you are important to you. And if that changes, then that can be tricky to keep that friendship together. What's your experience been of relationships as you've got older?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, that's a really important thing. It's like when you're kids, you don't really think about it because, you know, your friends and your friendship isn't really that deep. And then as you grow older and you mature, your values don't necessarily always align. And I guess, like, you know, I wrote the song when I was in my early 20s. I wrote it when I was 23, and I'm now 27. So I feel like in those past like 4 years, I've really matured as a person. And I feel like I'm a completely different person than I was when I wrote the song. And I feel like, you know, the person that the song was written about, it felt like at one point in our lives we were at a very similar stage in our development as people. But I feel like, you know, as you mature, sometimes you realise, oh, well, actually we are pretty different, or maybe they're maturing at a different rate, or like maybe just, yeah, their values don't necessarily align with yours.
Do they know that you wrote the song about them?
I hope so. I hope so. I don't know. I hope they listen to it and think that song's about me. That's a cracking song. It's about me.
That I'm her muse, basically. No, glad that happened. Do you know, it's funny, isn't it? Like I think as well, Susie, from what Anna's saying there about this idea of like friends are not forever, which makes me a little bit scared because I've had a best friend since I was 5 years old, and we're still. I mean, she lives in France. She lives in a different country. I've lived there for years, but she's still my best friend. And even the idea of losing that is is frightening. It's like losing a part of you, because these people are sort of entwined into who you are and the sort of tapestry of your life.
Absolutely. And I think I can completely relate to what Anna was saying there. And I do think I have a slightly different take that people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. I do believe you still can have lifetime friendships.
Oh, I like that. A reason, a season, or a lifetime. Okay.
Yeah,
I tick off my friends. See which one you are.
And people do come into your life at different stages for different reasons, and just, you know, where you're at in life, like workplace friendships. I've had such solid friendships in workplace, but then I've moved on and that friendship's just kind of disappeared because we're no longer seeing each other every day. But I do think, you know, it comes down to a number of things. You know, you have to make effort in a relationship and a friendship, and you know, that convenience of not seeing each other each day in a in like the workplace, for example, you know, so it just falls away. But I do think as we grow, you know, our priorities. I mean, the reason my friendships fell apart was because I was doing a lot of personal development. I was in a different job where I was getting exposed to different influences that was changing my perspective on a lot of things. And like Anna said, my values weren't in alignment with my friends anymore. And increasingly, I was not, you know, not liking the behaviour or not. We didn't have the same mutual interests, and it was difficult.
That can be triggering for the other person as well.
Absolutely, it's really triggering because they really sense you coming, the distance that's forming between you, and you know that you're not doing the same things that you like to do. I mean, one of the friendships, you know, the conflict came because I started saying, do you know what? I don't actually really want to do that. I don't enjoy that anymore. And it was like we were losing our foundation where our friendship was based on. Yeah. And it was like, okay, well, if we haven't got that foundation, what actually do we have in common? And it was becoming more and more apparent that we didn't have much in common anymore. And that wasn't because she was a bad person or I was a bad person.
Yeah, it's just different.
Changing. Yeah, we were just changing, different influences, different interests, different values, priorities, and, you know, stages in life as well. So it's not easy though.
No, it's not. And just a final point from you, from everything that you were saying there about your experiences, what's it taught you about what you look for in a pal now?
You know, I wouldn't like to not seek out friendships because of the actions of a previous friend. So I guess I just allow, as everyone does, I just allow friendships to form naturally. But I think that one thing I've really learned is when you feel like something isn't right, then it isn't right. And that's up to you to have that conversation. And it's up to you to seek out advice from other friends, or it's up to you to decide whether this is a friendship that you want to continue on with. Like I said, I do think I've matured a lot over the past 5 years. So my friendships now are genuinely just different than they were 5 years ago. But I think that it has totally been a learning experience in many aspects of my life other than just my platonic friendships.
It can be hard as well, just when you're older, Susie, that it's almost like then you become your sort of friends dating because you've got your friends that you've known for a really long time, and then when you start to meet new people when you're a wee bit older, it's like, oh, I don't really know how I should be doing this, are we? You know?
Yeah, and what I always find really interesting, so if there's like, you know, a big birthday coming up and you think, oh, I want to have a celebration, I kind of, because I've got such an eclectic mix of friendships and different friendship groups, and I'm like, I'm not sure if these guys would all get on together if they were all put in a room together. Yeah. So, you know, there's that challenge as well. And you do evolve as you grow older. And, you know, I like to have different people in my life and they meet different needs for me. And, you know, I meet different needs for them as well. And to put them all in a room together, they probably wouldn't all get on, but
you
know,
might be
like
surprised.
Kind of range. Well, you never know.
You might
I
be.
do like that eclectic mix, though.
Right, listen, it's been brilliant to chat to both of you. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
Brilliant. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. That was Anna Shields there and Susie Beaumont just discussing the sort of ins and outs, the intricacies of friendship. Sometimes it's not easy. Right, in a couple of minutes we're going to be talking about how musicians are expressing dissent and outrage through protest songs. Let's get some more music now.
Around in my house, flirting with my man. I'm telling all you girls, you need to listen to what I say. Now, woman to woman, you better keep away. Don't let clean up woman come into your house. Come into your house. 'Cause if she do, she'll try to clean you out. She'll try to clean you. Don't let clean up woman come into your house. Come into your house. Do, yeah, she'll try to clean you out. I know I've got a good man and he's someone I can trust. You can smile at him just as long as you don't touch. Now, girls, I done told you once, I'm not telling you again. What part of hands off? You don't understand. I'm trying to tell you something good. Woman, come into your house. Come into your house. If she do, she'll try to clean you out. Yes, she will. Don't let her clean up woman. Don't let her come into your house. Come into your house. If she do, she'll try to clean you out. Yeah. She's the kind of woman that will lay across your bed, sit down at your table, and have the nerve to eat your bread. Her clothes are always tight, she ain't nothing but a tease. If your man is weak, she bring him to his knees. For you, home wrecker, I'm as happy as can be. I love my man, and I know he loves me. It ain't my problem, you don't have a man of your own. If you wasn't so scandalous, maybe yours would come along. Trying to tell you something good. Come into your house. Come into your house. Yeah, she try to clean you out. Don't let her clean up, woman. Come into your house. 'Cause if she do, she try to clean you out. Now, ladies, I know y'all got those friends, you know, you always call best friends. But I had to learn the hard way. You know, you gotta watch. You gotta watch those so-called friends that be saying, oh, girl, I'm gonna come over and we gonna have potluck and all. You know, you got those friends that every time you turn around and wanna come around you and your man. She walking around with that short dress on, can't even hardly move, and ain't even got no hair in the back. I don't think you want this here. Baby, don't come for me unless I send for you. I always wanna knock on my door. Tell me, girl, what you do? Baby, I know what time it is. You trying to get in here and see my man, but you don't understand what type of girl you're fooling with, baby. I'm a real woman. You understand what I'm saying? And I will kick your...
It is just coming up to 9:30. It's Sunday morning with me, Connie McLaughlin. How you doing? I hope you're enjoying your morning so far. Now, since Friday, BBC One's Big Weekend has been in full swing in Dundee. If you're up that way, you might have felt the traffic or maybe heard some of the great music that's been coming out of there. But as well as providing entertainment, right, music has always played an important role in highlighting injustices and voicing dissent. But recently, renowned folk singer Shirley Collins denied that her genre of music is a potent political tool, though it has got a rich heritage in protest. So what has changed, and is everyone's experience is it the same for them? And have so-called protest songs changed with social issues now much more subtly weaved into contemporary music? That's the questions we're asking this morning. Here to talk more about that with us is Kapil Sasai, who's a protest musician, and Elizabeth Flett, who's a folk artist, theatre maker and writer. Morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good
Thanks for having
morning.
us. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on. I think the best place to start is, Kapil, what do we mean by a protest song?
It could be a song expressing an opinion of dissent against the status quo, or it could be a song illuminating a story that we don't know about enough but need to be hearing about, if that makes sense.
Are all songs, in a way, protest songs?
In my humble opinion, absolutely not. But some songs are just for having fun, just going out for having a wee dance. And I'm no stranger to that kind of music as well. I'm not in the mood to be, engaging with political topics all the time, being a protest musician. Sometimes I'm out there to have a nice time, and there's music for that does that job very well. But yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Elizabeth, what do you think?
I think folk music as a genre is one that has a really strong through line of protest as a theme in it, as a genre. But it is important to remember that protest doesn't necessarily have to be left-wing protests. So, for instance, to take an extreme example, in Nazi Germany, folk song was used to perpetrate, very extreme right-wing views. So, but definitely that kind of left-wing protest, which is what we tend to think of when we think of folk music, it's part of the vibe, I would say. It's been there for a while.
That's a really interesting point, and that's kind of what I was meaning about is every song in some way a protest song, because it can be so subtle. It can be music that we think is just, it's lovely, it's for, making us happy and sort of bringing our mood up and everything else. But it can be changing the way we think and feel. And is that not the point, Kapil, of a protest song?
Absolutely. I mean, with my own more recent music, I've definitely been trying to get people to engage with the music ahead of engaging with the message. Not that the message isn't important, but I think that sometimes the way that you package the message can be pivotal in getting an audience, maybe one that's not culturally aware of the cause I'm singing about, to engage with it more fully,
What did you make of what Shirley Collins had to say? Well, we're going to ask both of you that, actually, but Kapil, you first.
I'm a massive fan of hers. I've seen her, but when I saw her on the Lodestar tour, it's like one of my favourite folk gigs of all time. I'm not surprised that she feels that way, because I think that she makes something very clear in that comment. I obviously disagree with her because I make protest music myself. It would be weird to deny my own MO. But, not to make excuses for her, but I feel,
but
well, I think she really frames her own sense of perspective in that comment, because if you look at what she says in the context of the rest of the interview, she name checks Pete Seeger as a protest musician contemporary, and I'm like, that guy peaked in the 1950s. So she's obviously using an example that's, for want of a better way of defining it, a bit outdated with the current musical landscape. But that's why I think I could see myself agreeing with her, because if you think, oh, well, there must be a point where quote-unquote protest music tips over into capitalism so much that it becomes fluffy and not actually that dangerous in a way that's actually going to mean any meaningful change. So I can agree with her that even to this day there is music out there that's faux political and not actually getting anything done, and I could see why that would make someone a bit jaded, much like her perspective there. But there's a whole lot going on, and I'm happy to give examples of protest music that's doing incredible things right now.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I very much agree with so much of what's just been said. I think it's also worth remembering from the Guardian article that Shirley Collins is also speaking from a point of experience where she had to put up with really terrible behaviour from a lot of the influential men who were leading the second folk revival that was happening mid last century. So her perspective was also coming from the place of, here's Pete Seeger that everyone's thinking his songs are going to change the world, and I know that he's a really horrible person. And being a female folk artist, I definitely know how that feeling feels, where there's still these male singers with guitars. I won't name any names, but audience members come up to them afterwards and are saying, "Oh, aren't they inspiring?" And you're thinking, he completely blanked me in the dressing room and told me I had to switch my mic on. So I completely get where she's coming from with that. But I do also think that folk song is one tool in the toolkit for protest and civil disobedience, and it's not fair to pin everything on that. So sure, singing a song isn't going to change the world, but if you sing a song and write to your MP and practice civil disobedience in several other ways as well, it can be a really useful facet in the fight against right-wing politics.
A tool. Sorry, Kapil, on you go.
Are you a fan of Martha Wainwright at all, Elizabeth?
I don't know much, but I'd like to know more.
She has this incredible song whose title is entirely expletive, so I cannot say its name on the radio.
Please don't.
But
you can text me it later.
Yeah. But it's this incredible song about her. Well, for those who aren't aware, Martha Wainwright's whole family are famous musicians. Her brother is Rufus Wainwright. Her father is Loudon Wainwright III. Her mother was Kate McGarrigle. And she was talking about how, in this song, how guys with guitars who think they're going to change the world, her father included, like, the whole song's about the fact that her dad was out there writing songs about her, but not actually being a dad. And there's no substitute for literally being there and doing the right thing. And she name checks a lot of the fact that you get men with acoustic guitars who are heralded as this big revolutionary thing. But if we, scrutinize them a bit more, maybe they're not the nicest people. And that... I heard that song maybe a couple of decades ago, but that was me first being shaken awake, going, oh, there's a more context to this. And maybe when someone like Shirley Collins puts something forward, as you've quite rightly said, there is more perspective and context in there that we need to consider.
Do you need to live by the values that you're trying to help shape, Kapil?
As in the music I write myself, do you think?
I just mean, Jen, in a more sort of broader sense. So if you're saying that actually the people that are trying to make change through these songs are not necessarily particularly nice people, or the example that Elizabeth gave about the people that she's come up against who have not been particularly supportive.
Well, actually,
do we need to be doing that if we're making change, or actually do we need to be living and breathing these values that we're trying to sort of emanate to the world?
I think the irony is that people don't believe in this concept of intersectionality, i.e. the way that different things can intersect. I tackle this in my own music quite a lot, but, in the South Asian music sphere, racism's really bad, but being casteist, which is like a form of sectarianism in our culture, that seems to be perfectly all right. And it's just like, all prejudice is bad, all oppression is bad. Why is your kind of something that you're going through bad, but something that you'll do to somebody else perfectly all right? It is the same with men. It's like, you might get men playing the guitar going, racism's really bad, we should stop it. And they'll turn around and be really sexist, because sexism doesn't affect them. So I think we should firmly be preaching what we're writing songs about. But unfortunately, there's a public persona and a private one, isn't there? And that transcends all the genres of music to an extent, doesn't it?
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think so. I think, just as you said, I do think men get away with having a public persona and a private persona a lot more than women do, whereas there's much more of an expectation that a woman will be charming after the gig and talk to the audience, and even if they get called like a lovely young girl right before they go on stage, be like, oh, thank you so much.
Is that changing? Do you notice that changing? Because the women who you think now that are, and again, I suppose there's the juxtaposition. I was going to say stronger women. What does that even mean? So women that are there, that as voices are being heard, are we seeing this shift or change in any way from your experience, because you're there?
I think this is a really good time to be a woman in folk music, specifically in Scotland, and because of the work of an organisation here in Scotland called the Bit Collective, which is an organisation run by some of the women who are most involved in the Scottish folk music scene at the moment. And the work of that organisation is to promote gender equality in this scene and start these really difficult conversations that people have just been avoiding about how to make a more gender equal and non-sexist folk scene in Scotland. And over the last couple of years since that organisation started, I believe that there's been real tangible change. So although it's far from perfect, I do think that this is a positive time to be a woman in folk music in Scotland, which is a nice thing to be able to say.
Just a final point when it comes to these types of songs, and I guess this sort of idea of messaging through music. Can there be a good bit of virtue signalling going on, Kapil?
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. Like the comedy of... okay, actually, I will use the most perfect example. I sing against one of the most underreported human rights tragedies in the world, the Indian caste system, and I often get told, the caste system's not a thing anymore. You should stop talking about it. At Coachella, where there was a lot more South Asian representation this year, there was Diljit Dosanjh, a man who makes ostensibly quite casteist music more than often. He makes a lot of other music that's really good, but he continues making music that's kind of colorist, kind of casteist. And there was this viral video of a big DJ, I think it might be Diplo maybe, or Diplo, sorry, I forget. He was dancing along to the music, and I'm sure it not being in English, he's dancing along to it and he's not aware of it. But there was a lot of people just going, oh, there's a not white person on stage. This is amazing. This is progressive. This is going forward. I could not pick a more perfect example of virtue signaling. Going, it's cool that you're dancing to eugenics ballad and thinking it's a good thing, you guys. And people hate, like, the hate I get for saying stuff like that. I'm going to be getting some hate off the back of saying it today, but you know what? I'll be saying it today. I'll be saying it tomorrow. It's like,
you don't
that's
get
virtue
hate
signaling.
on this programme. Don't worry about that.
You get hate. You'll get hate after the programme.
That's what I was going to say.
Twitter.
About 10:05. We'll pencil it in. Elizabeth, final point to you.
Yeah, I think virtue signalling, particularly, I think my final point would be on the term of intersectionality and virtue signaling with folk music, is that it's important to acknowledge that folk music, although it has these roots in radical ideas and can be a really powerful force for change, we need to acknowledge that it's still a majority Caucasian genre, and we need to look at how to diverse ourselves as a genre, and we also need to acknowledge that it's a middle class genre at the moment largely, and need to work out how to get back to it being for more people than just middle class people. So I think folk music as a genre has so much potential to not just be virtue signaling and to be making a big difference, and hopefully folk musicians like me and the people that I work with are working towards that.
Elizabeth Flett, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your Sunday.
Thank you very much.
And that was Kapil Sesasai. Good to speak to you, Kapil.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Nice one. Talking about people who like to highlight social causes through their music, this is Karine Polwart. This is Better Things.
Years of big ideas distilled into a billion fears. A grand design, a shiny rocket, a bullet in a bully's pocket. So mesmerized by particles, we disregard the articles, the ones we wrote to keep the peace, sullied now in blood and greed and grease. Is this the best that we can do? Oh, I can think of better things. Can't you? With the devil's pitchfork in our hands, we turn the fields of foreign lands. We mine a gulf, we dig it deeper. We free the serpent from its keeper. Yet these are the hands that fix the bones, the ones that build with sticks and stones. These are the hands that plant the tree, the ones that pull a newborn baby free. Is this the best that we can do? Oh, I can think of better things. Can you? Oh, I can think of better things that hands can make and hearts can sing. For now we deal with those for whom life is but a carnal tomb in which the We may lament the deadly art of tiny atoms torn apart, visions that we can't return, and future fires in which we fear we'll burn. But this is the art of those before who found a cure within the core, the noble mind behind the ray that eased our earthly cares away. Is this the best that we can do? Oh, I can think of better things. Can't you? Oh, I can think of better things that hands can make and hearts can sing, and hearts can sing.
You're through to the final of the Scottish Cup. How's that feel?
Oh, it's a huge honour.
Scottish football's oldest prize is at stake.
Celtic take on Inverness Caledonian Thistle.
Celtic are chasing a historic treble.
They will be massive favourites.
We haven't done it yet, but we've given ourselves an opportunity to do something special.
But Inverness Caledonian Thistle have their sights set on lifting the trophy for a second time.
We'll not just be turning up and just being underdogs, we'll be hoping to make a game of it.
The Scottish Cup final on Saturday with build-up across the day and the live action from 5:30.
And that's surely the goal that seals the deal.
Watch on BBC One Scotland. Listen on Radio Scotland.
We've also got the Women's Scottish Cup as well this afternoon, 3:30, Celtic against Rangers. We're going to be talking about a church hit by scandal and drama next after this from Pill and a Tea.
Well, I know you heard of the Susan Q, and I know you heard of the chicken too. I know you heard of the cha-cha-choo, because the walk is a dance that you can do. You just walk, you just walk, oh, you walk, yes, you walk, yeah, you walk, and that's the walk. Well, I know you heard of the Texas hop. I know you heard of the old fox trot. But when you do the walk, you ride in style. You just shake your hips and close your eyes, and then you walk. Yeah, you walk. And then you walk. Oh, you walk. Oh, you walk. Yes, you walk. But when you do the walk, you stand in close and don't step on your partner's toe. You just walk. Yeah, you walk. Oh, you walk. Yes, you walk. Oh, you walk. That's the walk. Now, if you don't know what it's all about, come to me and I'll show you how. We'll do it fast, we'll do it slow, then you'll know the walk everywhere you go. You then walk, then you walk, now you walk, keep on walking, keep on walking, that's the walk, that's the walk.
Teeny, love that Hillsong. Just coming up to 10 to 10 here in BBC Radio Scotland. Just remember, after us, it's the Sunday Show with Martin Geisler and Fiona Stalker. But before that, right, a new 4-part documentary series, The Secrets of Hillsong, premiered in America last week. Known for its vibrant praise music and contemporary style of worship, Hillsong Church has garnered immense popularity since its birth in the 1980s. The documentary delves into various aspects of Hillsong's journey, including its downfall with allegations of financial impropriety, leadership challenges, and the handling of some abuse cases as well. Now, one of the prominent figures featured in the series is Carol Lenz, who had been the face of Hillsong with friends in the sporting world and celebrities like Justin Bieber. But his public image was dented when news of an extramarital affair emerged, which pretty much ultimately led to his dismissal from the church. Let's hear a little clip.
Hillsong is a megachurch, and Carl Lentz is the celebrity pastor.
Carl is so charming.
People idolized him.
There is a sense that pastors can be hot.
He was so special.
It was cool. Carl was this mega superstar, and then he just disappeared.
Intriguing. Right, let's delve into this a little bit more. Justin Brearley is author and a speaker and a broadcaster, and he joins us on the programme this morning. Morning, Justin.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
That sounds intense. It sounds very, very intriguing. There's lots to dive into. Talk us through, first of all, before we get into this, what is a megachurch? What sort of constitutes a megachurch these days?
Well, I think the official definition of a megachurch is any church with over 2,000 people in attendance over its weekend services. And so this is a phenomenon that primarily exists in the USA. In fact, over half of people who go to church in the USA actually attend a megachurch of some kind. And it's something that's really come about since the 80s and 90s. That's really when megachurches started popping up. But as we've heard, a number of them have been mired in controversy and scandal in recent years. And I think there's possibly something going on there in terms of the kind of atmosphere that they tend to breed.
Right. What's the atmosphere? What is it about these places that, can sort of end up in a place of scandal?
Well, I did a documentary a number of years ago looking at megachurches, and I visited a whole number of them, and they can all actually be quite different in terms of the theology and the worship and that kind of thing. But what I tended to find was a significant factor in all of them was that there was usually a charismatic lead pastor, someone who, was always, as it were, the figurehead of the movement, who had built the church possibly from scratch. And the danger, of course, in that is that you can tend to end up idolizing someone, and there is this phenomenon of celebrity pastors and so on. And I think that's one of the dangers of the megachurch. It tends to be centered upon one charismatic individual at the center of things. And I think that's probably where some of the problems have stemmed from, especially when it came to Hillsong New York, which is where Carl Lentz was the pastor.
Is that all just a reflection of our society, of Western culture, of I suppose culture in general, that we're drawn to people who are charming, who encourage us to think a certain way, that this is a sort of natural progression of organised religion, surely?
I think that's right. And to be honest, it's not a new thing that people get drawn to charismatic leaders. That's as old as the age of the earth, probably. But the problem is, I think, that churches are supposed to not be gathered around a human individual. They're gathered around God, obviously, around Jesus Christ. And if an individual kind of becomes the centerpiece, then obviously the focus is in the wrong place. I think the other issue is, for me, when I visited some of these megachurches, and don't get me wrong, there's lots of great things about these churches, that, the way that they put excellence into everything they do, the kind of facilities they have, the programs they run for all kinds of different people. I can see why so many people go to megachurches in the USA, but the downside is it can end up becoming something like a spectator sport, when you're in that big crowd and you're going to what effectively is an amazing kind of rock concert with an amazing speaker at the front. It can kind of not be quite real life. And I think that's where normal everyday churches, and frankly, in other churches, the normal kind of average attendance is somewhere between, 60 or 70 people in the congregation. That's normal. That's kind of what you would call a family. That's where you actually get to see people warts and all, and it's not kind of dressed up and looking fancy. So for me, I think it's important to balance it with the fact that actually church under normal circumstances is a lot more kind of down to earth, if you know what I mean.
Is it not just different though? Because as part of being there and going to church, that feeling of connection that you get with the divine, which is, I guess, the whole sort of, you go there for space to reflect and everything else and feel that connection. But you get a similar feeling when you go to a concert, when you go, when you have that feeling of just being, I use the word connection. Is it not pretty similar?
I think it is. I think there's a lot of overlap. And so the feelings you have when you go to that Coldplay gig might be quite similar to the feelings you have when you're standing in the megachurch and singing some wonderful song. And there's nothing wrong with feelings, don't get me wrong. I think it is a way in which, God connects with us. I'm a Christian. I have no problem with the idea that God uses those things. The problem is when you come to rely on it, when you think you can't connect with God any other way than in this kind of big setting with, these amazing musicians and the smoke machines and everything else. You've got to ask yourself, okay, but God surely can speak in other ways, in simple ways. And that's my fear, is sometimes in the mega church setting, you're setting it up like we can only connect with God if we spend a whole lot of money on a really big production, and that can't be true. So that's my only fear with the mega church thing. It maybe trains people to think in a certain way about the way we do connect with God.
What do you think it says about the overall perception of Christianity and I suppose faith communities in general? Is this just some sort of, is this a new path that we're taking to try and engage?
I can understand why megachurches have become so popular. As I say, it is more a US phenomenon. You don't find that many megachurches here in the UK. You do get some large churches for sure, but I think in the US, big is beautiful has been the motto for a long time. And there's a kind of sense in which, people enjoy getting into something that's as big as that. I think it's also just the fact that you can build really huge sanctuaries and facilities out in the US. You just don't have the land space to do it here in the UK, or the parking for that matter. So in that sense, it is one of those phenomenons that's a bit more of a US based thing. And I can see why people love it. I've enjoyed going to mega churches and feeling that, being part of that big thing. But at the same time, I think maybe the energy is moving away from the megachurch thing at the moment because of some of the scandals. I mean, the Carl Lentz scandal that is featured on this documentary is one among, sadly, a number of scandals of megachurch pastors who have fallen from grace in recent years. And I think it is because, unfortunately, when the focus gets put upon an individual, they can start to believe their own hype. And we've seen some really bad behavior, actually, from some megachurch pastors. So I think people are starting to get a bit more suspicious, a bit more cynical of that kind of arguably consumeristic form of Christianity, where you just go up and you're kind of, you just experience it and then you walk away again. And I think a lot of young people especially are looking for something more authentic, possibly something that is a little bit smaller, more community focused, even something that's more ancient. A lot of my friends who are coming to faith, now in their 20s and 30s, they're actually going to quite ancient churches. They want the liturgy and the mystery and the smells and the bells. So these things come and go, and I wonder whether we might just start to see the tipping of the megachurch phenomenon back into something more traditional even.
That's a really interesting point, because I was going to mention this, the idea of the informality of these churches compared to what we're used to seeing. Is it not that there needs to be something, because it's difficult to have a one-size-fits-all method of connecting with God. So is it a place for these churches, I guess?
I think there is. And one of the big takeaways, I think, from the mega churches, a lot of them were kind of birthed in something called the seeker-sensitive movement, which was all about kind of trying to pull down the barriers that often stop people from entering a church. And I think there's many churches could learn about helping to be places where people feel welcome, that they're not kind of feeling out of place because they don't know what to do, they don't know where to stand, they don't know where to sit, they don't know where, and so on. All of that, I think, is good, actually. We can learn a lot from just putting people at ease and helping them realize church is not this weird alien space where they have to learn all these rules before they can enter. But at the same time, I think people also want something different when they come to church. They don't want to just hear a kind of Christianized version of the latest Coldplay album. Because often the fact is the Christian church is often 5 steps behind the popular culture anyway. They're kind of aping it. And what I hear from a lot of people actually is I don't just want to hear the same thing as what I can hear, in my everyday life. I want something that feels mysterious, enchanting, divine, and for a lot of people that is actually about going back to something, you know, quite ancient and liturgical. So I'm interested by the fact that yes, we can do everything we can to put people at ease, but we also don't want to kind of make it feel like it's just normal. In a sense, people do go to church because they want, as you say, to experience the divine, and that can happen in all kinds of ways, I guess.
Big Coldplay fan, are you?
Yeah, I've mentioned them a couple of times.
I know you
do
love
like a bit of Coldplay.
Listen, who doesn't?
Coldplay.
Who does not? Listen, Justin, great to speak to you this morning. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Justin Fraley there on Mega Churches. That's it from me this week, actually. Off the Ball will be on the station from noon. Next, it's the Sunday Show with Fiona Stalker and Martin Geisler. One last song from me, though. I think it's only fair that it's from this lady. There's been an outpouring of love and admiration this week for Tina Turner, whose death was announced on Wednesday. This is her song to play us out. We Don't Need Another Hero. Enjoy your Sunday.